Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
And we are the Youngs.
Welcome.
Thanks for joining us today. Bethany and I have really been enjoying our study through conflict resolutions, and everybody has them.
Yes.
Everybody faces them. And way back weeks ago, it seems like now, we talked about conflict resolution in our marriage. Then we
Right.
talked about with our toddlers and with our children.
Right.
And we are smack dab in the middle of talking about resolving conflict with our teenagers.
Yes.
And coming up here in future episodes, we're going to talk some about blended families, how the conflicts can be solved there. We're going to about adult children, how to resolve conflicts with adult children.
Right.
And just hope this is a real help to you. If you're enjoying our series, I hope you'll like, I hope you'll share, I hope you'll subscribe.
Right.
And we are on YouTube, Spotify, you'll find us all over the place. And our producer, Jamin Baxter, does a tremendous job at setting all of that up and
Yes.
taking care of all that for us. And so shout out to Bax 5 Media. And so we're very thankful for his help in all that we do. And
Yes.
we are thankful for mypillow.com and their support. If you haven't been by there, check out mypillow.com. /young, or just use the
Yes.
promo code YOUNG, and you can get up to 66% off of their material. Their merchandise is amazing. So
It is
you'll
amazing.
enjoy
And
it.
remember, Christmas is coming. So,
It is.
fellas, if you're listening, it's a good place to go to look for a present for your wife. And I was also thinking, if you have adult children who maybe need some new towels or new sheets or whatever, or a brand new pillow, because that's what they're known for, those
Yes.
wonderful pillows, just check it out. It might be a great place to do your Christmas shopping.
Absolutely. And you still have just a week or two more before we are right at the couples prayer advance in Pigeon Forge.
How exciting!
And so we're just so close, and we've heard from some of you that you're coming. We're looking forward to it.
Yes.
We're going to have a great time together, studying God's Word, singing together, praying together, laughing
Yes.
together, and there'll be some skits there. Just all kinds of great things are going to be happening. We'll have a resource table.
Yes.
And so join us. I hope you, if you're on the fence, there's still some space available. Join us.
Yes,
and you'll be glad you did.
I would just insert here, you're going to have plenty of time just to be a couple too. It's not one of those conferences that you go and all you do is go to session. You will have time to be with your loved one.
Yes, to go out to eat.
Yes.
To go parking, or whatever. So check it out and join us. We want you so much. We hope many of you will join us. We're looking forward to seeing all of you there.
Yes.
And we're ready to jump into our conflict resolution with teenagers. So you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. Now, last week we kind of ended and kind of had to end abruptly, ran out of time.
Right.
But last week, one of the things we finished on is we were talking about we were talking about actions to take. We had looked through Proverbs 18 and just talked about dangers to avoid and areas to develop. And then we just started talking about working on that relationship. And sometimes what we find in a parent-teen relationship is that parents really either are intimidated or sometimes there's an issue and we know it's an issue and we don't want our teen to be miserable and we don't want to make a conflict.
Right.
And so sometimes we just let things go. But Bethany and I want to be very clear that there are times in parenting a teenager where hard action is necessary.
Absolutely.
And certainly when there's rebellion. And I said this last week, so I'm going to repeat it. A teen that is miserable because of rebellion should not intimidate you.
Right.
And it's easy because we live in a world where, the devil is always trying to attack our teenagers. And sometimes there's a rebellious action or a rebellious attitude. Sometimes the teen is just miserable. They're struggling with something and they don't like something and they're down, they're frustrated, they're irritated, they're rude, they're just going through a time where things aren't right.
Right.
And they're miserable, and as a result of that, everybody else is. So sometimes you just have to correct. And it's not a matter, here's what we do as parents. For some reason in our culture, we tend to say, okay, our kid is miserable, so let's give them more liberty. We'll just, we'll let you, we don't like it, but we'll let you do this in hopes that it'll make you
Right.
happy. We just
Right.
want the kid to get happy.
Right.
And so we'll let a teenager, we'll just let things go. And so the result is that the teen is more miserable.
True.
And there's greater conflict.
True.
So you have to do the hard thing. And sometimes that means you have to limit your child's liberty. In other words, you have to say, no, you're not doing that.
Right.
Or sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I've given you liberty in an area and you're still mad about things. You're just not happy. You're not doing right.
Right.
And we've tried to solve things. We've tried to give you liberty.
Right.
And just so you know, we're going to make some changes. And here's what we typically do: announce them in advance. So what we say is, just so you know, we're going to have a conversation soon. We're making some changes because things aren't well. And we'll be talking to you about those changes.
And that's when our children will say, "Oh, great! What are we going to have to give up now?"
And then sometimes they're like, "No, well, let's do it right now." No, I want you to. We need to think about it and make sure we're doing the right thing. And sometimes that alone changes a kid's life. They're just
Right.
like, maybe if I really pick it up and correct some things here, things will get easier. But often at that time, it is a matter of, and what we want is our child to have time to be aware that some changes are coming, to think it through,
Right.
to prepare their heart for it. And then I usually make a list when I'm going to end up having a discussion like this. And we may say to a kid, okay, we've given you some liberty right here, but we're going to curb that liberty because you have abused it. You've turned it to rebellion.
Right.
So you're not happy. You're not serving the Lord. So we're going to change this and we're going to change that. It might be you'd have to say, you know what, you can't wear that anymore. Or, you know what, I've given you liberty with your hair and all it's done is make you a miserable, unhappy young man because now you're just frustrated all the time. You know what, we're getting a haircut and we're going to get one today.
Right.
And just, whatever it may be, it may be the child has some freedom in an area that you're going to say, we're going to pull that back because you're not doing what you should be doing.
Right.
So what Beth and I want to say to you is sometimes you have to do the hard thing, mom and dad,
Right.
in order to get a kid headed in the right direction.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say not even in the area of we've given our child liberty in something. Maybe they're just not doing well. They're being disobedient or they're back talking and you've tried to patiently talk with them to try to find out what the root of the issue is. And there doesn't seem to be any root issue except they're just being hormonal, emotional, moody teenagers. Well, don't leave it at that. Then
Sure.
you need to just nip it and say, I'm sorry, we have tried to be patient here and you do not have a thankful heart. You do not have a kind attitude, and that is not how we behave in this family.
And so we're going to make some changes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And remember that a teen that is miserable because things aren't well, at least if you start putting them on the right path, they still may be miserable, but for the right reasons.
Well, and they won't be miserable for long because
Right.
honestly, they want that security of knowing my parents love me enough to get me on the right path.
So remember to take hard actions when necessary.
Yes.
And I always remember our friend Anna Tice. And
yes.
did I get this statement? I put it in here trying to remember how she would say
It's
it.
very close if it's not the right exact quote, but yes, go
She
ahead.
would say, God didn't put me here to make you like me. He put me here to make you do right, or something like that.
Yes.
And we always chuckled at that. It seems like such a funny thing to say, but it made a difference in their family because sometimes you just have to do the hard thing.
Absolutely.
When
And
you're
I know
parenting teenagers.
in our experience with our teenagers, sometimes you don't know what to do. And sometimes the Holy Spirit of God is saying, this is what you need to do. And you think to yourself, boy, that's going to be hard and they're not going to like that. But when we do the hard thing, it's almost as if we have a new child overnight. We've said, okay,
Absolutely.
you're done. We're not doing it that way anymore. And all of a sudden they're a happy teenager again. And we think, why didn't we just do that in the
Should
first
have
place?
done that to begin with. Absolutely.
Yes.
Now let's today talk about one other area. Moms and dads, if you have a teen or a preteen in your home, one of the things that helps with conflict resolution is there are some areas you should address before they have the option of becoming a conflict.
Yes.
And we actually got this list from the book, The DNA of Parent-Teen Relationships. And it's by Smalley and Smalley,
Yes.
dad and son. And
Yes.
and yet I thought this was so good. And although I don't know that we would have not have known the list, each of these were areas that we dealt with in advance, and they helped us in our relationship with our teens.
Right. And that way your child already knows what's expected when it comes to these areas that we're going to address. And then there is no conflict involved
Absolutely.
because they know what to do.
Now, there are 5 of them. And this comes right out of the book. And he says, number 1, you have to address this area, how to ask questions. Because teenagers are they begin to reason. They begin to think
Right.
things through, and they're evaluating things. And sometimes what we end up doing is we end up being sarcastic, or we end up being harsh or just, argumentative. But one of the things we tried to teach our children, and we so agreed with the book here, we tried to teach our children that in their teen years, it is okay to question.
Yes.
The issue is how you question.
Right.
And if you question wrong in a wrong way, then that's not valid. But if you ask questions in a right way, our go-to was always Daniel.
Right.
Because Daniel, you remember, was captured. His parents were probably killed, as far as we can tell. Daniel is now captured. He's brought down to Babylon to work in King Nebuchadnezzar's court. He's a teenager. And he's also a religious Jewish young man who's trying to live the law. And so the food and drink they were serving would have been in violation to what Daniel believes.
Right.
And so instead of Daniel having a rebellious heart or rising up and, taking this pseudo spiritual stand, you're not making me, I'm not doing it. What he did is he thought it through carefully, and then he went to the man who was an authority over him, and he asked about it.
Right.
And he had thought it through to the point that he asked the question about, could we do this instead of that? And he was prepared because he knew what the authority was going to say. Yeah, but what about?
Right.
And he said, well, I thought that through, and can we at least try it? I know that's a potential. Let's try it for this short amount of time.
Right.
And if it works, can we continue to do it? If it doesn't work, we'll do it your way.
Right.
And that learning, teaching that to our children on, you can ask questions, but you have to do it in the right way.
Right.
And sometimes it's what you used to say, the right way and the right time.
Yes.
There's a right time to ask the questions.
Yes.
And Daniel was such a go-to story, Daniel chapter 1. You ought to
Right.
review that as a mom and dad if you haven't
Yes.
done so lately.
So we tried to train our children in that that process, that if they didn't like maybe a command that David had given them or a decision that had been made, that they could come to us and they could come with a good attitude and well thought out options that they could maybe present to us, or maybe even they just want to know, why is this a wrong direction? Why couldn't I do this? My friends are all doing it. And we could sit down and have a good conversation, and it heads off that conflict of the child immediately with that whiny, why can't I, or whatever. So our children, to train them ahead of time
Sure.
so that they know how to ask these questions.
Yeah, one of my changes I made this summer in our son's life, I knew he was a little frustrated about it, and so one day I just said, "So what's the big deal here? Why won't you? Why are you still balking at this?" And his answer was, "Well, I just don't like it. I don't like it." And I said to him, I said, "Now wait a minute. You've not talked to me about it. You've not given me any options. You've not discussed it with me. You've just allowed it to cause you, emotional angst."
Right.
And it was yet again a reminder that we have to teach our kids how to ask questions. That helps to head off the conflict.
Right.
All right. Let's give the second one here.
All right.
This is a big one, and I thought this was so good. Expectations regarding cleanliness.
Yes.
In other words, sometimes moms and dads are like, our teenager's room is a pigsty. And we can get, so our teenagers never clean up after themselves. Well, that can become a major area of conflict unless you determine in advance with your teenager, this is the expectation.
Right.
In our home, when I was a kid, our expectation was your laundry always had to be put away, could never be seen. Your bed always had to be made.
Right.
And that was just the way it was. The closet doors always had to be shut. And my mom was probably a little over the top extreme about it. But the fact of the matter is we knew what the expectation was.
Yes.
And actually to this day, some of those expectations are such a part of my life. I still close closet doors.
Right.
And if the closet door is open in one of our kids' rooms, I will often walk in and close it.
Yes.
And it's just because my mom taught me that. And moms and dads, it is essential if you're going to prevent conflict that you have clear expectations regarding cleanliness.
Absolutely. And these are things that it's not something that automatically, because your child leaves something out and it's not up to whatever your standard of cleanliness or expectation was, that you're going to come down on them super hard. You just remind them. I have heard David say to our older boys, Often, if the boys come home for the summer from college, they're busy. They are working, and sometimes they leave before dawn so they can get to their job site or whatever, and then they come home super, super tired, and so their room can get a little on the messy side. And David will say to them, "Hey, before Saturday," or I mean, he might even say, "Before the morning, you need to clean up this room, and I want it to look like if your mom were to clean this room." And the boys know exactly what that means, and they give it their best shot.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's just a matter of saying, look, if your dirty laundry is 2 feet away from the basket,
Right.
it only makes sense, rather than throw it on the ground and later have to pick it up and put it in the basket, bypass the step of throwing it on the ground and just reach over and put it in the basket.
Right.
And so it's a teaching matter with
Yes.
teenagers, expectations regarding cleanliness. And for us, that even spills over into the kitchen. We don't leave dirty dishes in our house.
Right.
And what we discovered was that it's a lot easier to clean them while they're freshly dirty than to let it set up and then have to
True.
scrub and scrub.
True.
And then it builds up and it attracts ants. We live in Florida, so it attracts ants. And what we found was that here's our expectation. We finish a meal, we clean everything up and put it away.
Right.
And what we did is we turned that into a fun time.
Right.
We did it together. And before we'd watch a movie, before we, are going to sit and veg on, social media, we're just all going to get up and we're going to do the dishes. We're going to dry them and we're going to put them away. And we did it together.
Right. And our children expect that, our children who still live at home. And so if they need to go do something before we start the cleaning process, they might excuse themselves from the table and they will announce, "I'm sorry, I need to run to the bathroom. I will be back to help clean," because they already know
Absolutely.
that everyone cleans up after
All
dinner.
right. Then here's a couple more areas. This is areas you should address before they become a conflict. How to ask questions,
Right.
expectations regarding cleanliness.
Yes.
And number 3 rather, alternatives to spankings. Now, Beth and I believe in spankings.
We do.
And we don't go to seat on them. We don't
No.
use them excessively.
No.
In fact, we taught our kids this is a spanking matter. This is exactly what will happen. So it was always controlled. It was always on purpose. It was always a part of training. We believe in spankings. However, when you start getting your teen into right before teen years or into their teen years, spankings are no longer the best method of disciplining your child or correcting your child.
Right.
So here's something you can do. You provide alternatives to spankings and you discuss this with your teenager so that they know.
Right.
And alternatives to spankings can take probably, several different forms. It can be limiting something.
Right. Losing a privilege.
So you're going to lose a privilege. It could be adding something. You have to do more work, or you have to take a greater responsibility.
Right.
So it could be what we call grounding, and a loss of a phone for a week.
Right.
Or sometimes if it's a big enough issue, it can be something major. It can be, you know what? I know your basketball team is going to basketball camp, but you may not go.
Right.
Because you would not do right in this area. Here's the consequence.
Right.
And sometimes it's just the natural consequences. I know that as parents, we so desperately want to rescue our children
Right.
from natural consequences. We don't want them to suffer. But what we've discovered is that it is a good thing when our children have an issue in their life and there's natural consequences. Let them walk through the natural consequences.
Yes.
Even if it means they have to spend extra money, it means they have to do extra time. It means they have to work through an issue that's going to it's brutal. It's hard.
Right.
But don't be afraid to let your teenager do hard things.
True.
And so you have to discuss this in advance. Alternatives to spankings. Any suggestion you'd
I
offer?
would say, parents, you sit down and talk about it together and get some wisdom. Maybe ask an older parent, what did you do? Some godly wisdom, maybe get some biblical wisdom. Ask the Lord to teach you, because you do want the consequences to be something that's going to get your teen's attention, but you don't want to humiliate them. Now, there may be some embarrassing consequences. Maybe they get a speeding ticket and you say, you know what? I will pay it initially, but you are going to work until here in the house, you're going to do this many chores, or maybe they have a job, they're going to pay it themselves. And they have to tell people, nope, I have to go to court because I got a speeding ticket. And depending on what state you live in, they may have to take classes because they're a minor that got a ticket. And so, yes, that's going to be embarrassing. But what I'm talking about is you as a parent coming up with a punishment that would humiliate your teen, maybe in front of their peers or maybe even in front of their siblings. That's never a good idea.
Sure.
So make sure that you come up with things that, yes, let the punishment fit the crime, as the saying goes, but are wise things that are going to help your child go towards growing in truth and not towards having a bitter, rebellious heart because their parents came down on them too hard or in a humiliating way.
And catch this, what we're talking about is addressing these before they become a conflict. In other words,
Yes.
you don't want to wait till you're in the middle of having to discipline to figure out what to do.
Right.
You talk to your teenager and say, what are we going to do? You that come from blended families, sometimes, you have a stepson. Like, how are we going to handle this stepson? What do we do here? Or what you do is you have a conversation and you say, here's the rules. And let's determine what will happen if the rules aren't met.
Right.
And even have the teen sign it. Say, I will agree that if I do not do this, I will face this consequence.
Right.
And it's worth talking it through and even making an agreement so that when the issue comes,
Yes.
it is a predetermined alternative to spanking.
And they've already heard it and they already know. I would also be very careful, parents, about things having to do with church and punishing your child in that way. I know, like teen camp, David had talked about basketball camp, and maybe some of you would think, oh, I would never make my child miss a sporting camp because that's important. But then you wouldn't think anything about, well, then you can't just go to teen camp. Well, teen camp is a time of preaching and a time of spiritual development. So that's probably not a good punishment to put on your child. Or maybe you're going to miss this youth group activity where there is going to be preaching because, oh, they're going to have fun and I don't want you to go. But if they're going to hear preaching, maybe that's not the best punishment to do.
That's a good piece of advice right there. Now, there's two others in this areas that need to be addressed before they become a conflict, and we're cutting close on time. The first one is how to ask questions. You have to teach your kids that. That'll head off conflicts. Expectations regarding cleanliness. That's big with teenagers. Alternatives to spankings. That has to be discussed.
Yes.
And these next two could probably deserve almost an entire episode. Let me just give both of them.
Yes.
And then let's talk about dating guidelines and driving privileges.
Yes.
These are huge potential conflicts with teenagers. Now, in the dating guidelines, in our family, we just didn't do it.
Right.
It wasn't that we were opposed to our kids, having friends. Our boys had friends that were girls, and our girls have friends that are guys.
Right.
We can joke about it in our family, and we'll tease each other periodically. But the whole deal was we don't need an exclusive dating relationship in your teen years. Now,
Right.
we're sometimes alone in that because a lot of our families a lot of people we know allow their teens to have a date.
Right.
And I appreciated this because in reading the book, The DNA of Parent-Child Relationship, there's two things he said that I thought was great. Let me give them and you talk about them, okay? Tell me
right.
what you think. The first one he said was only with a chaperone or a group.
Yes.
So 16-year-olds don't need to be alone.
Right.
So only with a chaperone or a group. And then he said this, in their family, Gary Smalley said, in their family, every member of the family had to approve a potential dating partner. What do you think about that last one? I think the first one makes sense probably.
Yes.
Because if your kid is alone, there's dangers in that.
Absolutely.
And at a time when their hormones are raging and
Yes.
they're not always thinking things through wisely.
Right.
Having a chaperone or having them in a public group is a help.
Yes.
But that next one I thought was so interesting. I never heard anybody say that before. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea, first of all, because if your child is quote unquote dating someone that all the rest of the family is like, oh, she's kind of rude, or oh my goodness, he's so cocky and arrogant, we don't even like being around him, that just creates conflict in the
Yes, it
family
does.
because it isolates your child. They feel like they're quote unquote losing their heart to this person, or they
Sure.
really, really like this person, and all of the family slams on them all the time. That can create conflict in and of itself and create a problem between you and your child and your siblings and their sibling. But I think also, if you're going to allow your child to date, don't you want them to do things with you as a family? And so don't you want that person to be someone that you really like to be around and that their siblings are going to want to be around? I think that's just a great idea.
Yeah, and I do too. And remember, moms and dads, the point here is that this is not something you just spring on your teenagers.
Right.
The point we're making is that you are addressing these areas. You're having conversations. You're teaching them. You're explaining things to them. And you sit down as a family and talk about, now you're at this dating time. What are going to be our dating guidelines?
Right. Well, and our children knew from the time they were very little that they would not date until they went to college. And so that was never an issue that
Right.
came up.
And even then, with certain, guidelines and
Right.
ramifications,
Yes.
of course. And then here's the last one. We only got just a couple of moments here. Driving privileges is the last area that Gary Smalley said should be addressed before they become a conflict.
Right.
And that's a really big one because teens are the time when teens will start driving.
Yes.
And it's worth sitting down with your teenager and saying, here are the expectations.
Yes.
And here are the ramifications if you don't meet them. Here
Right.
are the guidelines.
Right.
And so your teens need to know, when can they use the car? Who's going to pay for the fuel?
Right.
Who's going to pay for the insurance?
Yes.
You explain these things in advance. One of our rules that we often had, and part of this was because we were frequently in churches to where our teens would be invited to do things with other teens.
Right.
And we loved that because what that meant was that our teens had developed a friendship, new friendships in a new church.
Right.
And some of those are lifelong friendships.
Yes.
Some of those friendships now our kids, write, text, call, Instagram message, everything. So we're very thankful for those. But we had this rule that our teens were never permitted to be in a car with only teenagers.
Right.
There always had to be an adult there. Now, can you make an exception once there's a rule? You can under special situations.
Yes.
But that was just kind of our general rule, and our kids would know. And so like the kid may say, I want to go, but the only way I can go is to ride in this car with these teenagers. Well, it might be that I can find an alternative and say, you know what? I want you to go, so I will take you.
Right.
And I'll take you to the restaurant and drop you off so you can be with your friends at the restaurant, and then I'll come back and get you. And so there's all kinds of alternatives, but our kids would know in advance, I can't go unless something happens.
Right.
And sometimes we've said, to parents who would ask if that could happen, well, here's kind of our family standard. And they're like, oh my goodness, that makes sense. So we'll change it and do it this way.
Right.
And so people have helped us with that. But our kids knowing that in advance always helped.
Yes.
Right? Any other thought about the dating or driving privileges before we sign off today?
I don't think so. Just as long as you just communicate it to your teenager or as they're coming into their teen years so they're not surprised. It is sometimes those rules that you make off the cuff, and sometimes you have to as a parent, but sometimes it's those rules off the cuff that cause those conflicts in those teen years.
Absolutely. Now you join us here. We got a couple more episodes coming up. We're going to talk a little bit again about developing that parent-teen relationship, go a little deeper with that. We want to talk about how to have a successful argument. and because they're going to come up, and we're going to tell you how to have a successful one. And then we also want to take just some time to talk about how to handle poor choices when your teen makes them.
Yes.
And so we're kind of coming to the end here. We're winding down. Thank you for joining us. Listen, if we can help you in some way, if you have questions, if you have a comment, if you have a story, we would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Shoot us an email. Send us a voice text from our podcast website. Just visit the Keeping It Young podcast. You'll see the little microphone. Click on it. It'll explain what to do, and we'll get a copy of that. We would love to hear from you and your thoughts on parent-teen conflict resolution.
Yes.
Any further thought?
I think we can hold on until the next episode.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this week. Hope you're enjoying these. Hope you'll like them, share them. Hope you'll subscribe. And most of all, I hope you'll put into practice what you're learning. Serve the Lord with gladness in this week ahead.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.